the little princess abandoned in the slums. At just 10 years old, she has to do the hardest and most exhausting chores for her family every day. She is often hungry and cold. She is also frequently subjected to unreasonable beatings and scoldings from her family. In this household, the only place that tolerates her is the dark, windowless attic. Today, she opens her eyes and finds herself in a bright room. Panicked, she abruptly sat up. Xiaoxin fearfully looked around. He had clearly fallen asleep in the attic last night. For a dirty child like him to appear in such a place, another beating was surely unavoidable. At this thought, he fearfully covered his head. However, what came to her ears was a gentle voice. A large hand had somehow reached out in front of her. "My little daughter, please, take a look at your mother." The girl looked up and saw a woman with tear-filled eyes. Behind her were 3 people with black hair and purple eyes, all staring at her. Their regal, noble air made the girl feel as though she had fallen into an ice cavern. In this moment, she really wants to return to that attic that belongs only to her. But the woman doesn't mind the mud on her. She tightly holds the girl's trembling small hand. "We are your true family. We are the ones who love you more than anyone else." The dreamlike scene makes the girl afraid to breathe. His soft muttering is directly denied by the other person present. "This is not a dream. You'll see me again soon. At first, your older siblings might tease you, and maybe even make you sad, but just wait. They'll love you more than anyone." Just then, a man burst into the room and covered the girl's eyes. He picked her up. This action displeased the others in the room. "Aren't you supposed to be preparing for the boarding ceremony? What are you doing here?" And we agreed that his ability could only be shown in front of his family. But the man still resolutely took the girl away from the room. He told her, "Today is the day he becomes emperor, and the girl becomes empress." As the man's hand gradually lifts, a bustling street unfolds before the girl's eyes. The scene, unlike anything she has ever seen, feels unreal to her. The man tells her that she will walk a great path in the future, and countless people will look at her with respectful eyes, and they'll fall in love. They'll be happy. The girl doesn't understand what he's saying. His long-held insecurity prevents him from hoping for too much. Suddenly, countless golden rays emanate from him. He turns around, wanting to ask the man who he really is. The other person simply covers his eyes, making a promise to meet again in the future. The next moment, the girl is back in that gloomy attic. Although she had known all along that the beauty of that moment was just a dream, the girl still couldn't help but shed tears of disappointment. She bravely wiped away her tears, convincing herself not to fantasize about unattainable beauty anymore. Suddenly, the door was violently slammed. The girl was immediately startled. Sure enough, in the next moment, her brother rushed into the room. He shouted at her to hurry up and wash today's clothes. Their rudeness was completely different from her family in her dreams. The girl trembled with fear. Tears welled up in her eyes. Yet, this didn't elicit any sympathy from them. The only fortunate thing was that she ran out of the room before they could hit her today. She scrubbed her clothes hard on the ground, pausing occasionally to warm her frostbitten amulet. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't wash the mountain of laundry, because his family simply didn't have any soap. The girl scrubbed the clothes, while recalling the dream she just had. Those people said they were her family. Looking at her reflection in the water, the girl remembered that family and she all had bright, her black hair appeared. But now, all of her family members share the same way of drinking. Could it be that everything the other person said is true? Just thinking about that possibility made the girl feel uneasy, but she quickly dismissed this unrealistic thought. Then she threw herself into washing clothes with even more effort. After finishing this, he still had to go back and clean the house, and prepare food. Otherwise, he would inevitably be beaten by his parents again. Just then, a man approached the girl. He walked up and greeted her. "Hello, Little Mute." The girl had no name, because he never spoke. Everyone called him Little Mute. Seeing that the girl did indeed have a pair of deep blue-violet eyes, the man pondered for a moment before leaning closer. He indicated he wanted to tell her something interesting. The girl was very wary of him. He was Uncle Figa, a thug from the alley. Before the girl could speak, Figa turned around and started muttering to herself. A while ago, his father got drunk, and bragged at the bar about killing a noble. He said the noble he killed was an adult male, who happened to be without a knight. But at the time, Figa just thought he was boasting. After all, he was a beggar born in the slums. How could I possibly defeat a noble who's been trained in swordsmanship since childhood? He handed the girl a blue glass ball. This tool can test whether someone has magic power, just like the girl. The only noble family with black hair and purple eyes is the Duke Lusiv Arlo family. This family has been a family of mages for generations. Therefore, if the girl possesses magic power, it's highly likely she's from this family. The girl knows nothing about magic. She can't understand how someone can summon water like that out of thin air. Seeing that the girl didn't respond, Figa became anxious. He wanted to teach her, but he had never seen magic himself. Suddenly, he remembered a saying. Magic is a very strong desire. he asked the girl. The girl hopes the crystal ball turns what color. The girl instinctively thinks of the purple color that represents the family in her dreams. In the next moment, the glass ball in his palm bursts with an incredibly dazzling purple light. Figa is overwhelmed with joy and tears. As long as he returns the child to Duke Lucifero's household, he will surely make a fortune. Excited, he kisses the girl's forehead. The intense stench nearly made him vomit. He told the girl to go back and take a good bath. He said he would come to find her soon. As he was leaving, he stopped. He warned her not to tell her family about this. I'll help you find your real family, he promised. Back home, the girl stood humbly in a corner. She, too, wanted to sit down and eat with her family. But his father, disgusted by his filthy, stinking body, ordered him to get out. The girl didn't dare disobey her father. So, cold and hungry, she hid in the attic again. She could only peek through the narrow cracks in the door at her family's laughter and joy. Having not eaten for 2 days, she was starving. But being hungry was better than being beaten. She didn't know how much time had passed. The outside has quieted down. The girl timidly opened the door. She wanted to see if her parents had left her any leftovers. The result, of course, was self-evident. The sensible girl quietly began to clean the plates. At that moment, Uncle Fagia leaned in through the window and greeted the girl. The girl was startled. She unconsciously loosened her grip. The crisp sound of the plate hitting the ground startled the girl, making her heart race. He didn't have the time to pay attention to Uncle Fagia on the windowsill. His eyes were already filled with tears from the panic. Fortunately, Fagia immediately took the girl outside without a word. Seeing the girl's dazed and lost expression, he comforted her, saying he would take her to find her real family. The people there all had black hair, just like him. The girl froze when she heard this. Could it be those people from her dreams? He drew 4 stick figures on the ground. Fagia assumed they represented the girl's current family. The girl shook her head in denial. Then she pointed to one of the figures. She then pointed at Uncle Fagia. She circled the remaining 3 stick figures. She pointed at her own hair. Figa completely didn't understand what the girl was trying to express. Was it because he was late? So the girl wanted to smash his head? After confirming 3 times, Figa finally realized. The separate stick figure represented the Duchess. She had the same brown hair as Figa. And the other 3 symbolized the Duke and his twin children. They have the same short black hair as the girl. After receiving Uncle Figa's confirmation, the girl's heart pounded involuntarily. Figa then took her to the kingdom's capital. This was the first time the girl had left the slums. Everything in the capital became a novel sight in her eyes. Figa noticed her dirty clothes. So he took the girl to bathe her. Cleaned up, the girl looked like a sprite who had wandered into the mortal world. Figa praised the girl, while speculating why her family hadn't bathed her. Perhaps they wanted to disguise her ordinariness as much as possible before selling her. After all, a child with her aura clearly came from extraordinary origins. Then Bega tossed the girl a coat, and told her. Actually, he didn't tell the gang about this. If those people find out, it would definitely turn into a kidnapping case. It would provoke the nobles. They would surely lose their heads for it. So he hopes the girl can help him after she gets home. Say a few kind words for him. The 2 of them then boarded the carriage heading to Duke Lucifero's residence. Before I even reached the entrance, the carriage was stopped by the guards. The knight, turning back, immediately noticed the girl hiding behind. He rushed over and took off her hat. The next moment, her black hair and purple eyes, symbols of her identity, were revealed to everyone. The knights all cried out, welcoming Lady Grazia home. Then, the 2 of them were taken to the reception room. Figa appeared very nervous. He didn't expect the Duke to personally receive them. The girl, on the other hand, was carefully watching him. The man sitting in the main seat was one of the people she had seen in her dreams. The Duke noticed the girl's gaze. His serious expression frightened the girl, making her quickly turn her head to avoid it. Although this person looked like the one from her dreams, he seemed even younger now. His gaze became even more terrifying. The Duke then signaled for the maid to bring over a crystal ball. Figa gestured for the girl to do as she did last time. The girl's heart raced with nervousness. She believed that the success last time was just a fluke. As time passed little by little, the crystal ball showed no change. Just as the Duke was about to dismiss this as a farce, the visit of the Duchess changed the outcome. When the girl recognized the visitor, she recalled the scene in her dream where the Duchess affectionately called her daughter. In the next moment, the ball in the girl's hand emitted a brilliant purple light. Both the Duke and Duchess were stunned by the sight before them. Figa, overcome with joy, hugged the girl. At that moment, the Duke silently acknowledged the girl's identity. After all, this was a crystal ball that only reacted to the Lucifalo bloodline. Then, the Duchess led the girl out of the room. After the girl left, the Duke's expression turned cold. He ordered Figa to tell him everything that had happened from the beginning, without a single lie. Meanwhile, the Duchess was strolling down the hallway with Grazia. She asked the girl how old she was. Calculating the days, she should be 10 years old. But the girl looks younger than a normal 10-year-old. She recalls her parents saying they were already tired of her after 10 years when they argued. The girl is sure she's 10 years old, no mistake. However, the Duchess still finds it strange. Not only was the late Duke tall, but even the late Duchess wasn't short. The girl tilts her head, confused. What does their height have to do with her? The Duchess saw his confusion, and gently stroked Grazia's head. She explained that the previous Duke was his father, and the current Duke was his uncle. The girl was completely bewildered. The Duchess in her dream had clearly said she was her mother. Then the Duchess asked if the girl wanted something to eat. The girl looked up expectantly but didn't say anything, thinking the girl wasn't hungry. The Duchess then asked her name. In her memory, her family had never called her by a name. The only one who smiled at her, her Uncle Fei, called her Mute. The girl lowered her head dejectedly. Seeing this, the Duchess comforted her, saying she didn't have to answer if she didn't want to. The girl shook her head repeatedly, indicating that wasn't the case, until the Duchess carefully asked if she had always been. The girl only nodded slightly. Having received the answer, the Duchess couldn't believe it. She crouched down and asked why she had never heard the girl's voice. At this moment, the Duke was getting annoyed with Figa, because they had been chatting for a long time without receiving the key. The next moment, the Duchess rushed back to the room, and asked him why Grazia hadn't spoken. Under the Duke's stern gaze, Figa began to talk about the girl's family. Actually, at first, the girl could speak, but because her family had long abused her, from a certain point on, she stopped speaking altogether. Meanwhile, Grazia was waiting in another room. He felt lost. He didn't know what to do. He sat stiffly in the chair, gazing into the distance. Just then, the butler entered. He introduced himself, while preparing tea for Grazia. Noticing the girl watching him, the butler smiled and told her not to worry. In this house, no one could touch her if she didn't want them to. He'd known who she was from the first moment he saw her. After all, he still vividly remembered what Grazia looked like as a newborn. He then told her what had happened a week earlier. A masked woman had shown up. He handed the guard a bag. Although the other person looked suspicious, he felt no sense of danger. He even felt a sense of familiarity. Inside the bag were two items. A note that said a man would appear with the missing Gladia in a week, and the necklace worn by the previous Duke. The necklace of the chosen child. He was born with the ability to glimpse the future. He can even exchange time with his future self from 10 years later. In the future, he is a revered magical knight. But the present him has been abused and tortured for a full 10 years. Every day, he is forced to do the hardest and most exhausting chores in the house. He often has to endure unwarranted beatings and insults from his family. It wasn't until 10 years later, in a dream, that Grazia finally met his true family. But having suffered endless abuse, she didn't dare hope for the beauty in her dreams. Fortunately, the Fey family of thugs discovered the girl's identity, and kindly sent Grazia to Duke Lucifuro's house in the capital. The girl learned the truth about her abandonment from the butler. That day, the Duke had gone out with Grazia, who was still an infant, and they didn't return for a long time. So the butler gathered the guards to search for them. When they finally found them, the Duke had grown tired of me, and Grazia had disappeared. The butler regretted not protecting me better. After the Duke, she left to prepare food for Tia. Soon, plates of exquisite desserts were brought in. Tia's eyes lit up with excitement. It was the first time she had seen such beautiful food. The housekeeper noticed that although the girl was drooling, she hesitated to start eating. She smiled and told Gladia not to mind what others thought. So, little Dia picked up a dessert and began to eat. In no time, she had devoured everything on the table. Seeing how much she enjoyed the food, the housekeeper jokingly asked if Dia hadn't eaten. Hearing this, the girl stopped eating. She gestured a "2" to the butler. Could it be that Miss has missed 2 meals? Little Dia didn't speak. Only then did the butler realize that she had been hungry for 2 whole days. A wave of guilt for the Duke washed over the butler. Just then, a pair of twin siblings barged in. Seeing Grazia's black hair and purple eyes, they assumed she was the child of a mistress. They were sure their father had had an affair. That's why he kept her hidden from them. Little Tia was at a loss for words. These 2 fuming children must have been her older brother and sister from the dream. Seeing her sister Diana's words becoming more and more outrageous, the butler sternly stopped her. It's wrong to talk about things you don't know. Diana felt wronged after being yelled at. He saw his parents were both angry, so he thought they must be arguing. In his eyes, it was all Gladia's fault. He believed it was because of Gladia that he was scolded by the housekeeper and called a pest. Dawson also said he would kick the little boy out. The butler then reported the matter to the Duke. The Duke showed no reaction. He simply asked how the child was doing. This address made the butler realize the Duke's caution. Once he referred to Grazia this way, it meant Grazia had officially become a maid in the Duchy of Lucifuero. The butler then mentioned that, aside from some mental issues, he's similar to the previous Duke in every other aspect of his personality. The Duke handed the butler a document. It contained information about the child's family, which he'd found after recently turning the slums upside down. They are now all imprisoned in the underground dungeon. The appalling words in the report made the butler clench his teeth. If what the report says is true, then Negracia's situation is relatively fortunate. She is merely unwilling to speak and somewhat timid. If it were someone else, they might not dare to look anyone in the eye for the rest of their life. Later, the butler resigned from his position. He wanted to stay by Grazia's side and take care of him. The next day, little Tia woke up in a soft, comfortable bed. Everything around him was so beautiful he could hardly believe it. Except for the little incident yesterday. He felt like his older siblings hated him. But my sister said in my dream that he would love me in the future. Little Tia believed I could wait for that day. Because in the past, I had also been waiting for my family to change their minds. I opened my mouth to try and call out to my brother and sister. But the butler's sudden entrance interrupted me. He explained with a big smile that he was going to teach Master Grazia how to wash up. At his gesture, the maids prepared the face-washing water. Little Tia excitedly dipped her hand in. The water was just right, completely different from the icy stream. Then the head maid handed her a bar of soap. The girl couldn't believe the soap was so exquisite. In her experience, soap was black, and no matter how much you washed clothes, a sour and foul smell would linger. So the girl couldn't put down the soap. Unconsciously, she rubbed it into a large foam. The maid was pleased that the young lady liked the gift she had prepared. She reminded her that there was still much more to learn. The younger sister, who had been away for 10 years, returned home for the first time, but her older siblings treated her as an enemy. They ordered her to leave. The little Dia was guided to have the same black hair and eyes as their father. They treated their never-before-seen younger sister as the child of a mistress. Fortunately, the butler showed her great care and affection. Because little Dia didn't speak much, he gave her some paintbrushes and paper to help her communicate. With the help of the head maid and the butler, little Dia gradually adapted to life in the Duke's mansion. Today, the butler told her, the Duchess is taking him to the temple, back in the slums. He'd heard people talk about it, though no one had actually seen the temple. In his mind, it was a holy building where angels descended. At the thought of going to such a place, little Dia's face lit up with excitement, and he was accompanied by the Duchess, who he liked the most. In a cheerful mood, little Dia drew a picture of the Duchess on paper. However, on the other side, the Duchess looked rather upset. She learned from the doctor that little Dia was severely malnourished. But compared to her physical condition, the doctor said that little Dia's psychological problems were even more serious. Because of past experiences of abuse, Ziadia feels deeply insecure inside. If Ziadia feels that he might lose the happiness he currently has, he could experience a mental breakdown in an instant. So it's important to ensure that Ziadia receives care both physically and mentally. In no time, the Duchess had changed Ziadia into new clothes. Although these were clothes discarded by Diana, Ziadia, wearing such a delicate dress for the first time, was still happy and paused in front of the mirror for a long time. Afterward, the Duchess led little Dia into the carriage headed for the temple. Once inside, little Dia snuggled close to the Duchess. So clingy. Her affectionate manner made the Duchess chuckle. Then she explained to little Dia why they were going to the temple. Two families in the empire possessed the power of the gods. They were descended from the empire's first king and the great mage who revolutionized the magic system. After the two married, they had two children. The eldest son became the crown prince and inherited the kingdom. And the second son became the head of the Luchifu Alo family. The Duchess stroked little Tia's head and comforted her. Actually, people with divine power haven't appeared for generations. This is just a routine test. Once it's confirmed, it means that Tia will officially become a member of the Luchifu Alo family. Tia was excited about becoming a noble. Little Dia felt it was somewhat unreal. Just a while ago, he didn't even dare to look a noble in the eye. Suddenly, two figures darted out from the other side of the seats. Diana and Darson didn't believe the mistress's child could become a Luchifu Alo. The helpless Duchess explained little Dia's identity to them. He is your uncle's child. In other words, your cousin. After arriving at the temple, the driver took them to see the Archbishop. He had prepared tea long ago and was waiting for Lady Grazia's arrival. The moment he saw young Tia, the Archbishop knew she was a member of the Lucian Alo family. Later, the Duchess mentioned that 10 years prior, the previous Duke had also brought young Tia to the temple. Her ability should have been confirmed at that time, but the Archbishop was unaware of the results. It turned out that Tia's abilities were confirmed by the Pope 10 years ago. This was because the Pope needed to maintain neutrality between the royal family and the Lucian Alo family. So this time, he did not come in person. Then the Archbishop asked Ziadia to place his hand in his palm. He began to chant blessings from the gods. In the next moment, Ziadia's hand suddenly erupted with dazzling golden light. Both the Archbishop and the Duchess were shocked. This undoubtedly signified that Ziadia had accepted the power of the gods. Previously, the resonance between the twin siblings and Victory was very weak, but little Dia was completely enveloped by Victory. On the way back, the Duchess seemed worried. If the royal family were to learn of this, they would surely move against the Luciv Alro family. Looking at little Dia, he suddenly had a thought. Could the previous duke's death and little Dia being an omnipotent god be connected? Just then, the carriage window suddenly shattered. A sharp dagger pierced through the glass and into the carriage. After the attack, the guards all raised their weapons. The Duchess immediately shielded her 2 children. She yelled for Tia to come to her. However, Tia seemed not to hear her. He gasped for air. On the verge of a mental breakdown. With his life threatened, flashbacks of past abuse flooded his mind. Now, only fear remained in young Dia's eyes. The next moment, a warm embrace brought him back. The Duchess guided him to slow his breathing, assuring him that the knights would protect him. Before he could finish, the knight urged them to evacuate immediately. A magical flame shot from the distance, reducing the carriage to ashes in an instant. The little palace maid I picked up from the slums possesses the most powerful omnipotence of the gods. She can swap time with her 10 years older self, and this terrifying ability is undeniable. Feared by the royal family, they even sent assassins to erase all traces of them. On the way home from the temple, Xiaodia had been acting downcast the whole time. In her dream, the Duchess said she was her mother, and would love and protect her forever. But now, the Duchess has openly admitted that she is not her daughter. Thinking about it, she feels like she will be lonely and abandoned again. Little Dia cried in fear. Unexpectedly, the next moment, they were attacked by assassins. A magical flame struck the carriage directly. Fortunately, warned by the knight, the Duchess and her 3 children escaped in time. However, they were given no time to breathe. Countless assassins sprang from the woods, and grappled with the knights. Seeing the situation take a turn for the worse, the Duchess told the twins to take young Dia and run. Although he couldn't use magic, he wanted to use his body to protect the children. Just then, another magic attack came from afar, accompanied by a violent explosion. Both the knights and assassins lay scattered on the ground. The Duchess was also caught in the explosion, and Boji was injured. He struggled to raise himself and check on the child's safety. However, the scene before him tightened his heart. A mage was slowly walking toward the young Dia not far away. The frightened Dia crawled toward the Duchess, step by step. At this moment, the Duchess's vision gradually blurred due to her injuries. The 2 twins stood in front of the Duchess. They wanted to protect their mother. However, the assassin didn't take them seriously. The assassin simply asked if the little Dia on the ground was an omnipotent user. Hearing this, the Duchess exerted all her strength to cry out. It seemed the assassin realized the Duchess was somewhat in the way. The assassin decided to deal with the 3 insignificant people first. A verdant magical crystal sword instantly formed in the assassin's hand. The 2 twins also began to gather their magical power to form a protective shield. At this moment, little Dia was already in tears. She heard the Duchess's weak plea, "It's alright. Gladia, quickly run." In the next moment, a golden light burst from little Dia's body. The original little Dia had already disappeared. In her place stood a young girl with black hair and purple eyes. Meanwhile, Xiao Dia wakes up somewhere else. Diana, excited, was ready to have Gladia deliver a message to the past Xiao Dia. But when she opened the door, she was shocked to find Xiao Dia lying on the sofa. She was immediately stunned. It turned out everyone had made a mistake. This was Xiao Dia's first time using the all-powerful time. As a result, the thick stack of apology letters was wasted. He then solemnly told Xiao Dia that he had exchanged time with his future self. He must not reveal anything about what he saw in the future. Otherwise, altering the causal laws could be beyond what his current body could bear. Xiao Dia just realized that this was the future, 10 years ahead. The future Duchess and the butler rushed over upon hearing the news. He excitedly hugged Xiao Dia and apologized. At that time, his mother did not understand Xiao Dia's thoughts. "I have so much to tell you." She gently cupped little Dia's dirty face. "Your name is Grazia. You're my most beloved daughter in this world." Meanwhile, Grazia confidently prepared to gather evidence. Although the assassin didn't know who this sudden newcomer was, as a precaution, he fired a magic spell at her. Gladia began to chant, unhurried and composed. The imposing magic, as it approached Gladia, suddenly dissipated. Finally, it transformed into a shower of petals dancing in the air. Then, he raised his hand and cast another spell. The distant assassin shrieked in agony without warning. His eyes were veiled by an unseen force. Enraged, he drew his sword, intending to kill Gladia. Gladia effortlessly dodged each of his attacks, and accurately captured the information engraved on the opponent's bracelet. After learning the assassin's identity, Grazia swung her sword mercilessly. This strike seemingly only wounded the back of his hand, but in reality, it severed the meridians throughout his body that circulate magic. Soon, the assassin was easily captured by the Duke's reinforcements. Grazia then turned her gaze towards her young brother. Older sister immediately hugged them both. She encouraged them, saying they were both brave. Even though they were scared, they still used all their strength to protect their mother. By now, the Duchess had guessed the girl's identity. She tentatively called out the name, Grazia. Hearing this, Grazia excitedly hugged the Duchess. I couldn't compose myself. Tears streamed uncontrollably from my eyes. After healing the Duchess, Grazia explained to her that he was summoned by his 10 years younger self. He also reassured the Duchess not to worry. He would take care of everything in the future. The girl who saved others revealed her true strength to her family for the first time, accompanied by a dazzling golden light. Little Jia swapped times with her 10 years older self. With just a casual word, the assassin's magic was instantly dispelled. Then, with a slight raise of her hand, the distant assassin let out a blood-curdling scream. The Duchess present wore a look of disbelief on her face. There was no discernible flow of magic. Yet she could use magic. This immense power can only be stopped by the legendary power of the gods. Elsewhere, upon learning of the assassin, the Duke called a meeting. Their ability to shoot him down on his way back to the city means they knew little Jia was the gods almighty at least several days ago. The Duke considered a worse, but more likely, scenario. 10 years ago, his brother took the newborn little Jia to the temple. At that time, the Pope already knew about Dio's ability, and the only one who could collude with the Pope and obtain this intelligence is the royal family, who crave power more than anyone. Unfortunately, the Duke has no proof. He didn't get any information from the assassin either. The Duke gritted his teeth in anger. This stubbornness is just like Dio's father in the slums. That scum didn't have the guts to kill Dio, who possessed divine power. During these 10 years of endless abuse, the Duke suddenly became worried about young Dia's development. He could sever an enemy's arm without hesitation in the future, which undoubtedly meant he had experienced many similar things. The butler was teaching young Dia, when he suddenly announced he was about to discuss something very important. The relationship between the Lauchifalo family and the royal family. Tia's father, as a descendant of the great mage, I possess exceptional magical talent. At a young age, I became the captain of the Royal Magic Knights. But the Duke was previously unemployed. Unable to engage in politics or business, his dream was to live a leisurely life with his wife and child. Because Lucifel also possesses royal blood, and even divine power, he cannot hold any power. To completely reassure the royal family, Lucius Allo must unconditionally support the royal family. However, if there's a disagreement among the royals, he should prioritize the emperor's will. He can disregard the opinions of other royal family members. Therefore, the Duke has never intervened in the succession struggle. Just then, the head maid interrupted them. The sudden news chilled the butler's heart. The emperor ordered all of Lucifu Allo's direct descendants to enter the palace. Before that, the Duke spoke with young Dia all night. From young Dia, he learned that he couldn't tell him anything about the future, and didn't know the specific price he'd have to pay. All along, using the Almighty's power came at a great cost. Some will lose their voices. Some will lose their strength. Little Dia was startled after hearing this. The Duke continued to explain. Such a price must be paid. It's usually to save someone or to stop time. Compared to the reward, these prices are often something people can accept. Little Dia understood the Duke's meaning. If it was to save the Duchess, his one arm wasn't that important. The Duke then told little Dia to prepare to meet His Majesty. He believed that if he explained the omnipotent ability clearly, there might be no danger. In the blink of an eye, little Dia was dressed with the help of the servants. The cute cloak and hat made little Dia look like a doll. The Duchess couldn't help but gasp in admiration. Little Dia was delighted. He skipped over and asked if he looked like his sister, because his sister's hair and eyes were the same as his. So little Dia also wanted to be as pretty as his sister. His innocent words touched the Duchess's heart. However, when Diana saw her mother come out holding little Dia's hand, he said again that he hated Dia. Don't think that just because you suddenly appeared, you'll win over everyone in the family. The Duchess firmly stopped Diana. She warned her that if she ever spoke to little Dia like that again, the Duke told little Dia that perhaps the Emperor would want to see you. At that point, you could do as you wish. After receiving an affirmative answer, the Duke gently patted little Dia's head. They soon entered the palace. As expected, the Emperor's first order of business was to check on little Dia's head. Little Dia hesitantly stepped forward. Seeing the imposing Emperor on the throne, little Dia trembled with fear. He dared not speak. Finally, overcome with nerves, he started hiccuping in front of everyone. This made the Emperor laugh heartily. The Duke immediately stepped forward to smooth things over. Because of the recent assassin attack, the young palace maid was still a bit shaken. Little Tia was extremely aggrieved. She had just said she could do it. If her future self came here in 10 years, things might turn out differently. She wants to protect her family with her own strength. In the next moment, little Tia glowed with golden light in front of everyone. Gladia, dressed in knight's armor, knelt before His Majesty the Emperor. Gladia, a maidservant from the Oro family, greets His Majesty the Emperor. No one could believe it. Gladia, the all-powerful one of the gods, was actually a servant of His Majesty the Emperor. Upon hearing this news, the royal family members were in turmoil. One faction sought to win over the crown prince with his beauty. The other side wants to create a confrontation between Glacia and her political enemies. Not long ago, little Tia summoned her future self from 10 years ahead. Upon hearing Glacia's self-introduction, the emperor burst into laughter. Her attire was from the emperor's royal knights. Since the future god of omnipotence swore loyalty to her, the emperor gradually lowered his guard against the Lucifalo family. He then asked Glacia what kind of omnipotence she possessed. Unlike any omnipotent god before him, Gladia's omnipotence comes without a price. As long as he resolves to protect those he cares about, his omnipotence allows him to swap time with his future self. However, he cannot divulge any information about the future, or the past will become distorted. The price he pays is physical pain. Upon hearing this, the emperor was perplexed. Now, Grazia says she is a royal knight, which is essentially revealing future information. In response, Grazia explained that although this is indeed something that will happen in the future, speaking of it won't change the future. In other words, no matter what, the future Grazia is destined to serve the emperor. Those around him, after hearing this, couldn't help but start whispering amongst themselves. At this moment, Grazia suddenly told the emperor that before he was summoned, he had just won a game of chess against his majesty. She expressed her hope that he would keep his own secret weapon for the future. As soon as these words were spoken, the empress was greatly surprised. Empress Lasha's face instantly darkened. Meanwhile, little Jia arrived in the future. The scene before her nearly frightened her out of her wits. The emperor was kindly asking her if she wanted to learn to play chess with him. In the emperor's mind, the most important thing in chess was courtesy. But for someone at the apex of the empire, constantly experiencing all sorts of open and covert struggles, valuing courtesy, it's rather absurd. Therefore, the emperor only plays chess with those he respects. But Jia is an exception. He's the only person the emperor feels he should thank. Jia knows the emperor is talking about his future self, 10 years later. Then the emperor hands him a chess piece. This piece is called the queen. It can move in any direction he desires. Therefore, he is the most powerful piece on the board, and also the most important one to be careful with. Although right now you have nothing but your family, in the near future, you will walk the path you desire. Meanwhile, the Duchess also realized that Jia's relationship with the emperor was unusual. If he were just an ordinary subject, it's impossible to play chess with the emperor. The emperor happily expressed his desire to speak with Grazia privately next time. After the court session, Grazia sought out the duke. He wants to utilize the power of the Luchev Alo family. Hearing Grazia call him father, the duke showed a kind expression. Remembering how his older brother often encouraged and supported him when he was down, the duke unconditionally supported Grazia's decision. Since my brother is no longer here, he will become the family of Grazia. Soon, Empress Lasha called her son, Zion. She ordered Crown Prince Zion to find a way to become the companion of the godly all-powerful. Zion refused his mother's suggestion, not only because she was 15 years older than Grazia, but also because, according to the rules, Lucifer Arrow cannot marry into the royal family. Unexpectedly, Empress Rasha didn't mind at all. She said that as long as the other party was willing to be a mistress, there was no problem. After all, there were similar cases in the past. Then, Rasha gently lifted Zion's chin. She advised her not to miss anything that could become her strength, and not to make her mother feel disappointed again. Soon, the queen learned of Empress Rasha's plan to win over Grazia. She knew that Rasha was a woman who would stop at nothing to achieve her goals. At a loss, she blamed the second prince. It was all because she didn't have a pair of golden pupils symbolizing royal status. That she was constantly at a disadvantage against imperial consort Lasha. This led the third princess, Aileen, to propose a solution. Compared to her annoying son, the empress favored this daughter more. Aileen stated that if they could instigate conflict between Glacia and imperial consort Lasha first, the problem would be solved. Imperial consort Misha, who held the same status as imperial consort Lasha, also had a son. Although she's not interested in power, if she facilitates a marriage between her son and Grazia, then Empress Rasha will be forced to contend with her. The queen also thought this was a good idea. However, her daughter's excellence made her loathe the second prince even more, even threatening to kick him out of the house if he remained so useless. The Ice Girl possesses the world's only divine omnipotence, and she has been subjected to repeated scorn and retaliation from her older sister, because Tia had been working so hard in her lessons lately. The Duchess suggested a family outing to relax, but in the blink of an eye, Tia disappeared from her maid Tasha's sight. It turned out that Tia's scarf had blown onto the ice. Even though it was dangerous, she wanted to try and retrieve it, because this scarf was a gift from his mother. It was also a recognition of his hard work in studying during this time. At that moment, Tasha noticed Daya on the ice. He shouted for Daya to stay still and not move. At this point, Daya was only 2 steps away from the scarf. Just as he was about to pick it up, a strong wind suddenly blew in. Little Jia, having lost his balance, fell directly into the lake. The maids and knights on the shore were startled. Little Dia in the lake fell unconscious. When he woke up again, he heard his mother and a knight arguing. The knight told the Duchess that a normal person wouldn't remain motionless after falling into the water, because everyone has a survival instinct. But the young maid didn't struggle at all back then. He reminded the Duchess that even if the maid was close to her family, it wouldn't necessarily inspire her desire to live in the future. The Duchess found this hard to accept. The knight then told her another cruel truth. The maid fell into the lake because of Lady Diana's wind magic. The Duchess collapsed into her chair, stunned by the successive revelations. Just then, Tasha rushed in. She grabbed the Duchess's hand, defending Dia. Miss Asha's soap would suddenly disappear, and she would often fall inexplicably during her walks. Although she can't sense the flow of magic, she clearly knows what's happening, but has always chosen to endure it silently. The Duchess listened. My body swayed, listening to the people inside, their anxious voices. Little Dia, lying in bed, was consumed by guilt. It was all his fault. The next moment, Little Dia woke up in another room. He opened his eyes and saw his sister, 10 years older, sitting by his bed. Diana caressed his cheek tenderly and apologized. He did a lot of wrong things when he was little. Although my future self forgave me, he wasn't the one who experienced it back then. So, being able to see Dia like this, he feels truly happy. As he spoke, tears welled up in Diana's eyes. Little Dia gently wiped them away for his sister. But the kinder he acted, the guiltier Diana felt. He explained that when the assassins attacked, it was the first time he'd seen someone die. She was terrified that her mother and family would also be killed. That's why she blamed everything on Dia. She regretted it ever since. She was upset that she hadn't understood Dia's suffering sooner. Why did I kick her when she was down? Why wasn't I more loving towards her? Hearing Lydia forgive her, Diana held her sister tightly. Unable to compose herself for a long time, she vowed to become the person who loved her sister the most in the world. Meanwhile, a blinding golden light awakened Diana. Seeing her future self, Grazia, greeting her, Diana was so scared she started foaming at the mouth. Without waiting for Diana's consent, Grazia plopped down on her bed. Diana angrily told Grazia to go back to where she came from, 10 years in the future. She refused to acknowledge Grazia as her sister, and didn't like this suddenly appearing younger sister. But Grazia said she loved her older sister, because my sister is a very brave person in her heart. Even if she hates me now, it's okay. In the future, don't feel sorry. If I miss my sister, I will occasionally come to see you. Before leaving, she said she had left a gift, but Anna found it a bit confusing. Who would have thought? The next moment, the dimly lit room was illuminated by beams of golden light. The stubborn Diana from earlier began to soften. On the other side, the Duchess was crying to the Duke about what had happened between the children. He had never believed Diana would use magic to bully others. But just now, Diana not only revealed how she had bullied little Dia, but also persuaded Darson to join in. Suddenly, a cry of "Mama" interrupted their conversation. Grazia rushed into the Duchess's arms, nudged and nudged again. The Duchess told Grazia, "If Diana still dislikes you later, I hope you won't hesitate to tell me." Grazia told her mother not to worry, because her sister had said that she was the one who loved her most in the world. Her sister was just afraid that their mother would die because of her. After doing all that, the Duchess's eyes filled with tears. Even so, Diana shouldn't have taken her resentment out on little Dia. Weren't you scared back then? Grazia explained, "It's nothing. In the slums, people are dying of hunger and disease every day, and my sister is still young. Mother should go and comfort her." Having said all this, Grazia was about to return to the future. After bidding farewell to the Duke and Duchess, little Tia appeared before them. She also believed her sister wouldn't hate her forever. The Duchess carefully pushed open Diana's door. Diana was immersed in Grazia's magic. Her mother's sudden arrival startled her. The Duchess stroked Diana's cheek, and asked if she wanted to sleep together. That way, she wouldn't be scared at night. Diana nodded. Then the Duchess, after hearing Diana's thoughts, the court lady burned down the garden that her ancestors had cultivated for many years on her first attempt at using magic. Unexpectedly, this almost brought disaster upon her entire family. Not long ago, because little Dia was bullied, the butler, while standing up for her, also realized that it was imperative for little Dia to learn magic. However, the maid, Tasha, seemed very worried. After all, the butler, like her, they are all ordinary people who cannot use magic. Regarding this, the butler said, he did this to prevent anyone in the palace from getting hurt again. Furthermore, he believes even if young Dia learned magic, she wouldn't rashly use it to harm others. Considering the rule that Luchavalo cannot learn magic without royal permission, the butler promised he wouldn't do anything illegal. But regarding basic magic knowledge, he needs to educate the little maid about it. What if little Tia has exceptional talent? What if she accidentally learns it? There's nothing that can be done then. Tasha was shocked and horrified. How is this any different from teaching her magic? Soon, the butler began to vividly explain the 3 forms of magic. But no matter which one, having magic power is a prerequisite. Little Dia asked a question. Why could Tasha use the magic kerosene lamp without having any magic? The butler was moved to tears by Little Dia's intelligence. He explained that the creator had imbued the lamp with natural magic beforehand. So even someone without magic could use magic items. The butler praised Little Dia's understanding. He prepared to take him for some practical exercises. Soon, they arrived in the courtyard. Before we start, the housekeeper specifically warned Dia because he was afraid she would use magic. Accidentally because of the bugs. Dia honestly said she wasn't afraid. So the housekeeper changed his story. He said that the maid, Tasha, was afraid of bugs. To protect her personal maid, the little princess, surprisingly taught herself. After learning the magic, seeing the butler so engrossed in his role, Little Dia and Tasha were both speechless. Following the butler's instructions, Little Dia then tried to sense the flow of magic. Soon, he saw dense magical particles all around him. The butler reminded him that the next step was to imagine how to use it. Little Dia closed his eyes. The first thing that came to his mind was a fireball that incinerated everything. The scene of him and his mother practicing magic is still vivid in my mind. In the blink of an eye, a blazing fire gathered in front of Little Dia. The butler and Tasha were both terrified. The next moment, the flames poured out. In an instant, more than half of the courtyard was burned down. The Duke's face darkened when he learned that the historic family courtyard had been destroyed. His expression was grim. He couldn't believe that the honest and loyal butler would do such a thing. Now that the fire at the Luchifu Aloha household has spread, it's only a matter of time before it reaches the royal family. If someone catches wind of this and uses it against us, the Duke publicly declared that Little Dia is a once-in-a-lifetime genius. If anyone asks how it was done, just say Little Dia accidentally cast the magic on a whim. Never mention that someone taught her. With that, the Duke motioned for Dia to follow him. Better to deal with it ourselves than wait for others to come knocking. Why don't I turn myself in? Little Dia hesitates, then reveals his thoughts. He wants to be stronger than that magician. So next time, he can protect his mom himself. The Duke gently explains that his mom has already been protected by him, albeit by him from 10 years in the future. Little Dia blurts out without hesitation, then I need to be even stronger than my future self. Little Dia's eyes are full of determination. The Duke smiled with relief. He told young Dia that protecting everyone was his responsibility as the head of the family. He told him that all he needed to do was find a way to become stronger than his 10 years older self. Soon, the Duke brought young Dia to the imperial palace. The Duke was about to explain on Dia's behalf, but the emperor stopped him. He wanted to hear it from Dia himself. Little Dia then innocently remarked that he hadn't realized magic was so simple. He then turned to the Duke, looking for confirmation. The Duke, however, was sweating profusely from Little Dia's words. The emperor also didn't believe magic could be used so easily. He pressed Little Dia, asking if someone had taught him. Little Dia nervously denied it, about to offer the absurd excuse that his maid, Tasha, was afraid of bugs. Thankfully, the queen was the first to object. She pointed out the absurdity of young Tia using magic without any training. After all, even the great magician, Luchifu Aloha, had a teacher. She suspected that the future Grazia was secretly using magic. Young Tia stammered, unsure how to explain. At that moment, royal consort Russia spoke up against the queen. He didn't think a future maid would have a reason to burn down her own family's courtyard. Then, the two rivals began bickering right there in the open. The queen insists that someone has secretly been teaching little Tia magic. Princess Lasha, on the other hand, mocks the queen for being too harsh on the young ones. She knows that in the future, Grazia will swear loyalty to the emperor, yet the queen keeps making things difficult for her. Seeing that the queen was about to lose control of her emotions, the emperor intervened in time to stop their farce. Just as he was about to bring this matter to a close, a minister suggested a solution. All they had to do was have the little maid use magic in public. This way, we can determine whether the queen's guess is correct, or if the young maid really can use magic. If the young maid is lying, we will have to consider punishing the Lucci family of the Enro clan. Princess Rasha agreed, but the queen insisted on investigating whether there was a teacher. The emperor was somewhat disappointed, explaining that his delay in the magic education was not to confirm the young maid's mental state, but I hope to give him some time to heal. It's natural that magic is dangerous. My original intention in teaching him magic was to provide him with a suitable outlet. Hearing this, the queen reluctantly apologized. He also possesses the strongest divine omnipotence in the world. Yet because of this, he has been repeatedly harassed by the queen. He doesn't believe a 10-year-old child can learn magic without a teacher. After all, even great magicians have teachers. He even suspected the young palace maid used omnipotence to summon her 10 years older self. The empress's groundless speculation displeased the emperor. He explained that he never opposed palace maids learning magic. He was merely worried that her shallow understanding of magic could accidentally hurt others. Later, to verify whether little Dia could use magic, the emperor summoned his most trusted magic knights to help confirm. A knight named China stepped forward from the ranks. He taught little Jia a non-offensive magic spell. Little Jia closed her eyes and felt the flow of magic. The next moment, the palace was enveloped by countless glittering, golden stars. The queen was immediately dumbfounded, while China smiled and congratulated little Jia. Your first time and you could use such beautiful magic. After confirming that little Jia could use magic, the emperor once again criticized the queen for being too strict with the child, especially harsh towards the second prince. As soon as he finished speaking, the empress anxiously tried to explain. However, the emperor didn't want to hear her excuses. He agreed with the duke that the little maid could study magic, and would select a suitable teacher from the magic knights. Then he announced that court was adjourned. Only the duke was asked to stay and chat with him. Lydia was then led by a maid to the waiting room. When the butler learned that a magic knight would personally instruct the young palace maid, he couldn't contain his joy. The magic knights only served His Majesty the Emperor, so this act was tantamount to announcing the emperor's favor towards the young palace maid to everyone. Lydia seemed indifferent, munching on her cookies. All I could think about was how delicious these cookies were. Suddenly, he asked the butler, "What does it mean when they say the empress is strict with her children?" Before the butler could answer, a clear female voice came from outside the door. Consort Lasha entered the lounge with the first prince. Smiling, she said she would answer the question. Consort Lasha and the first prince casually found seats and sat down. At the butler's reminder, little Taya also found the seat directly opposite Empress Rasha. He then bowed to the two of them. "Greetings, Empress Rasha and the first prince of the Xian tribe." The title of first prince was something the butler had specifically reminded him of during his lessons. Sure enough, after hearing it, Rasha's mouth slightly curled up. It seemed that her son being the first prince was something she took great pride in. And indeed, that was the case. Back then, after Princess Rasha married the emperor, she quickly gave birth to a child. That child is now the crown prince. Empress Xian of the tribe has always been upset about this matter. As the emperor is about to select the crown prince in the coming years, the empress has been very anxious. The more she acts this way, the more cruel she is toward the second prince. Tia glanced discreetly at the first prince. The butler had said during her lessons that the first prince's abilities far surpassed the second prince's. If nothing unexpected happened, the crown prince would be the first prince. But if that were the case, she feared the remaining princes and princesses wouldn't meet a good end, because Consort Lasha wasn't someone known for her mercy. At this moment, Princess Rasha tried to show kindness to little Tia. She reminded little Tia that royal blood also flowed within her, and today, she had even spoken on her behalf in the palace. She hoped that the young princess would believe that her intentions were good. As she spoke, she extended her hand to little Tia. The butler, standing nearby, nervously watched little Tia. It seemed that little Tia was about to take Princess Rasha's hand. The butler desperately wanted to warn her. Fortunately, the duke arrived just in time. This made Empress Lasha reluctantly stop what she was doing. After Empress Lasha left, the butler collapsed onto the sofa in terror. He then told the duke what had happened. The duke immediately saw that Empress Lasha was trying to use little Jia. The butler also advised the young maid not to feel grateful to Empress Lasha. Most people in the palace approach you for their own gain. Not long ago, the duke told the emperor he didn't want young Jia involved in the royal power struggles. He complained about why Jia was being favored in front of everyone. But the emperor said Jia can't stay out of this. Countless people secretly covet his divine omnipotence. Moreover, Gladia was the first to pledge his loyalty to him. Recalling how young Jia said he would be even stronger than his future self, the duke realized that Jia's future wouldn't be easy. It was then that the emperor revealed his reason for summoning the duke alone. Young Jia had caught the attention of people from other nations. The divine maiden, blessed with the ability to see the future, revealed the visions she'd seen to her parents for the first time. Upon learning that Jia would one day become empress, the butler lost his composure. His face drained of color. Not long ago, young Jia returned home from the palace, and eagerly rushed into the duchess's arms to be affectionate. He excitedly explained that the emperor had agreed to let him study magic. But seeing the duke's serious expression, the duchess immediately realized their trip to the palace hadn't gone as smoothly as it seemed. The duke then asked them both to go to his study to talk. Although he wanted to act spoiled a little longer, young Jia obediently agreed. The duke got straight to the point and told them about the neighboring prince's desire to meet Jia. Because he was very curious about powers beyond magic, he hoped that this revision of the trade terms could include Xiadia. At this point, the butler noticed that Xiadia was lost in thought. So he began explaining the background of the trade terms. This is a trade agreement between the empire and the kingdom. Every 10 years, the two countries take turns sending envoys to each other's capitals to sign the agreement. And this time, it happens to be the empire's turn to visit kingdom. The duke suspected the other side had ulterior motives for making such a request. If he refused, the empire would undoubtedly be at a disadvantage in trade. Although the prince was only 14, given that he was the kingdom's next heir, the Duchess couldn't help but worry. Fortunately, the Emperor wanted to ensure Tia's safety. They deliberately dispatched the royal guard to accompany them. However, they haven't decided which prince will lead the delegation. If they favor the second prince, it will intensify the royal power struggle, and if they choose the first prince, it will further solidify his current position. But none of this matters to the Duke's family. As long as little Tia remains safe and sound, that's enough. Then Tia mentioned that Aunt Sana had helped him in the palace. When everyone was arguing, she proposed the most beneficial solution for Tia. The Duchess then remembered that Sana had recently asked her if Tia could really use magic. She had clearly anticipated the argument between the Empress and Princess Lasha. So the Duchess decided to visit Sana and thank her before the delegation departed. After the conversation ended, the steward immediately began Dia's lessons. Because the powers of each omnipotent god are different, the steward wanted Dia to fully understand her own abilities. And, after all, the kingdom has many powerful mages. If something goes wrong, even Grazia in 10 years might not be able to solve it. Little Dia didn't understand why this was happening. Logically, the kingdom and the empire were two friendly nations. This naive thought was immediately refuted by the butler. Because the little maid's ability to see the future was too powerful, they might risk war with the empire to acquire her. Seeing little Dia was a little frightened, the butler quickly reassured her that he was overthinking. Then, he sharply analyzed the state of little Dia when she first used her ability. But little Dia said that was the second time. A week before coming to this house, he had also used omnipotence. Hearing this, the housekeeper was startled. This date coincided exactly with the appearance of that mysterious woman. Unexpectedly, little Dia's next words were even more shocking. He said the first time he used omnipotence, he didn't travel 10 years into the future, but to the time of his wedding. The manor's butler instantly paled. He asked little Dia which scoundrel it was. Little Dia wasn't sure if revealing it would change the future, but he didn't want to hide anything from his family. So he told the butler everything he had seen. When he heard little Dia would become Empress Tasha, the butler found it hard to believe. He rushed out of the room. The Duke and Duchess, having seemingly overheard the news, came together. They want to know what happened to young Dia in the future. By this time, the butler had already guessed the truth about young Dia's omnipotence. Past records show that the specific omnipotent abilities an omnipotent being possesses depend on their desires. For example, an omnipotent being with the ability to stop time first displayed their power on the day their father died. An omnipotent being with healing abilities usually has a seriously ill loved one. And young Dia, perhaps because of the long-term cruel abuse he suffered, his omnipotence took him to his happiest future. The Duchess glanced at the shy little Dia beside her. She affectionately patted his head. She wanted to confirm whether what he had seen was truly a happy future. Little Dia answered without hesitation. At that time, both his parents and his older siblings had all said they loved him very much. The Duchess looked at him with a loving expression. Is this why Dia is here? People have finally realized the truth about the little princess's omnipotence. Because of the miserable fate she suffered in the past, Dia's greatest wish is to see a happy future. That's why her omnipotence is so special. She can swap time with her 10 years older self. After that, to become stronger, Dia jogs and exercises with the butler every morning. Although it was a bit tough for 10-year-old Dia, he still persevered with all his might. After exercising, Dia gulped down water. And the butler told him that the Duchess would take him to see Sana that afternoon. He heard that Sana was the 8th prince's mother. However, Dia didn't have much of an impression of the 8th prince. After all, with the several attacks on the Xian tribe, the first prince has drawn more attention to himself. Speaking of the prince, the butler's face suddenly darkened. Lady Gladia, as the future empress, could it be that those princes, several years younger than her, stole her? Little Dia thought about this. The housekeeper lost control of his emotions. While the housekeeper was in a frenzy, little Dia explored the courtyard alone. Suddenly, she saw her older siblings in the distance. Little Dia excitedly ran over to greet them. In stark contrast to little Dia's enthusiasm, Diana looked disgusted at her arrival. Finally, she turned and left. Ayres gave little Dia a satisfied look. Then he ran after Diana. Little Dia was left standing there, feeling wronged. The housekeeper arrived just in time to witness the whole thing. She comforted Dia, saying that things would get better. After all, Diana had made a promise with her about the future. So, little Dia cheered up, and regained her fighting spirit. He turned around and threw himself into the next round of training. But watching little Dia run, the butler knew that he hadn't fully let go inside. He was just deliberately acting strong. In the afternoon, the Duchess took little Dia to the palace. He said they might meet His Highness, the 8th prince. Little Dia was about the same age as him. They might become friends. The carriage soon arrived at its destination. However, it was Gladia, 10 years older, who stepped out. The guards and maids present were all startled. Sana's personal maid, Rachel, carefully inquired, "Should I address you as, sir?" Gladia readily accepted. They were then led into the lounge. The moment they saw Gladia, surprise registered all over Sana's face. After exchanging greetings, Grazia offered an embarrassed explanation. Little Dia can't quite control his omnipotence yet, so he's summoned here every now and then. Sana was about to invite them to sit down, when she suddenly remembered her precious son. She introduced Nishilik to the Duchess and Grazia. Grazia properly bowed to the 8th prince. Sana urged her son to greet him as well, but the blonde little man remained silent. Grazia didn't mind at all. She even complimented Nishilik, saying that although he seemed small now, his bones would develop well, and he would grow as tall as the 2nd prince. This was undoubtedly good news for Sana, because Nazirlit was shorter than her peers. She was always worried. With that, she invited them to sit in the courtyard. Grazia, in turn, tried to subtly reveal information about the future. When Sana expressed her hope that her son would make more friends, Grazia looked a little awkward. Seeing this reaction, Sana had to accept reality. Afterwards, the Duchess and Sauna exchanged their parenting experiences, while Grazia teased Neferik. "Do you know how small and cute you are right now?" Hearing this, Neferik finally reacted. Grazia quickly extended her right hand, gesturing for him to look at her palm. "The bitten nails here are proof of my anger from working the night shift. It's proof of his powerlessness, his low status, and his unwillingness to accept his fate." Nazarick didn't understand what this madwoman was talking about, but when he heard Grazia mock his weakness, and say he was no match for her, Nazarick's eyes instantly turned fierce. He was just about to confront Grazia, when the next moment, a golden light flashed around her. Tia and Grazia each returned to their own worlds. The Duchess asked where Tia was. Tia excitedly said he ate a lot of sweets. He didn't know where he was. He only remembered someone named Rachel being very kind to him, and that she had prepared a lot of food for him. After he spoke, everyone turned their gaze towards Rachel, the maid, not far away. Rachel nervously waved her hands, indicating that she knew nothing. Little Tia was still savoring the dessert, when she looked up and saw a boy glaring at her angrily. Although Grazia saw no threat in Shirit, little Tia was quite frightened by his stare. On the way back, the Duchess warned her not to talk about the future anymore. Little Tia said she was fine, but the Duchess was still worried she would get hurt. He really hopes Tia's world will always be filled with beauty, but such a personality might be taken advantage of by those with ulterior motives. Then the Duchess asked her how it was going with the 8th prince. His fierce gaze instantly flashed through her mind. Tia fearfully said that she thought he hated her. The Duchess then promised to minimize their future encounters. Soon after, the Duke received a handwritten letter from the Emperor. In the end, the Emperor chose the 1st prince to lead the envoy. This news relieved the Duchess. After all, the 1st prince is rather kind to Dia. If the 2nd prince were to go, it might be more difficult for them to get along. However, the Empress might dislike Dia even more because of this. Meanwhile, Nesrit was learning swordsmanship. Technically, members of the royal family should prioritize learning magic, but Nazirith was born with insufficient magical power, so Sana placed her hopes on his swordsmanship. Fortunately, Nazirith inherited excellent swordsmanship talent from his desert kingdom. Combined with the robust physique Nazirith would develop, like the 2nd prince, Sana believed he would achieve remarkable things in the field of swordsmanship. However, the next moment, Nazirith fell to the ground. Seeing this, Sana smiled. She believed Nazirith was doing this to hide his true strength. Even his own mother wanted to hide it. So Sana cheered Nazarick on with all her might.